if you don't care, if you treat your account as a whole anyways, then Performance Max can do really well. Or the people who still today clinging on to control with audience targeting, what do you call it, demographic targeting, stateside targeting, not using any broad match, not using any phrase match, not using any dynamic search ads. Performance Max will increase your exposure and it will perform better than what you have today, meaning it will produce more revenue at a better ROAS. But you could have gotten that with a proper setup anyways. However, if you don't know these things, and if you're not at a proper size where you can pay somebody to do it, Performance Max is actually the best thing that ever happened to Google. Please don't take that as a thing and put it on Twitter, because that's going to be an issue for me.
Hello and welcome to another episode of PPC Town Hall. My name is Fred Valles. I'm your host. I'm also one of the co-founders and the CEO at Optmyzr. So today we're going to talk about that topic that nobody seems to be getting enough of. And maybe some people do get enough of it, but that's why those people aren't watching. But we're going to talk today about Performance Max, the new campaign type from Google that's not so new anymore, but we still keep learning about it every day. As Google is automating more and more of what we used to do, how do we get the best results? And so we have two amazing experts who are going to join us today to talk about the B2B and the B2C angles and how to make Performance Max drive the best results for you. Or maybe we'll find out that it doesn't actually drive results. So should be a great episode. Thanks for joining, and let's get rolling with PPC Town Hall. All right, my two experts here today, Andrew and Menachem. Both of them have been on the show before. Both of them have talked about Performance Max before. It's great to have them back after a couple of months here. Some of the episodes that you guys did were some of the most watched and most popular we've had so far. So Menachem, welcome back. How are things going?
Things are going pretty well. We're always learning something new about Performance Max. I feel like Andrew mentioned this on Twitter. Performance Max seems to be like, no matter how much you talk about it, people are dying for more knowledge. And there seems to be many, many different ways to kind of run a campaign and find success, or like you mentioned, realize it doesn't work for a certain account.
Okay, and you've done some great posts on Search Engine Land, so we'll cover all of that. Andrew, I think you said it was your most popular tweet of the year was about the thing that shouldn't be as popular as it was, but how are things going with you?
It's stupid. So I think one of the things that we continue to learn, and that is that the general perspective on Performance Max is it's really appealing to everybody, like agencies and in-house. And me, as somebody who puts a lot of pride in what we do, I'm scared that there's so many people who just want to go, let's just put it on one campaign and run away from it. And I've really tried this year to put some thoughts in, as I have an article coming out on why I think this is such a big issue and when it actually applies. Because the way that we've looked at Performance Max this quarter is just, we can't see it do what it says it does. This whole yes, it does search and shopping, but this whole spiel with all of us having to put a lot of stuff, a lot of videos in there, a lot of images in there, and we just haven't seen that produce any solid results for any of the ones that we've actually run at any significant scale. So I think that continues to be an interesting point for me. Where does Performance Max do what we think it's supposed to do with all the things that it says in terms of the video and display side?
Interesting. So you might be playing bad cop here, and Menachem may be good cop. We'll see how that goes. But to give listeners and viewers a little bit more perspective, Menachem, remind people what B2B, B2C, who do you mostly work with?
We do a good mix of both. So on the B2C side, a lot of ecommerce, B2B, a lot of lead gen. And I think, to Andrew's point, Performance Max is meant to be an all-in-one campaign, but it's really not as simple as you would think it is. It's a very complicated campaign type, and it doesn't just work if you just set it up and go. It does require that deeper strategy.
Okay, so still no set it and forget it in PPC, which means all of you watching today, managing PPC accounts, your jobs are safe for at least a little while longer. And Andrew, what's your business mostly looking at?
We are 100% direct to business to consumer B2C e-commerce. I like to say we have a mix of the old-fashioned e-commerce model of selling a bunch of different brands, and then we have another half that's the D2C, just single product, the Caspers, the Warby Parkers of the world. Not that yet we have those two, but that's kind of the two different types that we work with the most.
Great. So yeah, let's start, and maybe Andrew, on the ecom side, we'll start with you. But with Q4 now behind us, Q4 is always like a big quarter. There's specific dates when the sales pick up. How did Performance Max do with that fluctuation and that big quarter? Did it drive results, or were you still kind of relying on traditional shopping campaigns?
So the way that we structure a lot of campaigns is I would say that half of what we do is Performance Max and half is standard shopping across the board under the 40 different advertisers we work with. And on the ones that are running like Performance Max, it more or less performed just like we saw Smart Shopping perform in the past. There was a little bit more fighting on what search actually ended up in Performance Max and what didn't. We tend to be proponents of running the shopping only Performance Max model, just because the way that we typically run search and shopping, for that matter, is about getting as many insights as possible and treating every single keyword as a finite resource of revenue. So if we see that a core keyword doesn't perform very well, we want to find a way to make it perform. So lumping everything into one campaign doesn't work well for the way that we typically work. With that being said, we work in a lot of different countries in Europe where we will utilize a full-on Performance Max setup, just because launching in, let's say you're in Germany and the UK, and then launching in the Netherlands, France, and Spain, you can't manage it all. So in those countries, we'll always add like just a full-on Performance Max campaign. And the way that we've seen it is that it tends to work just like every other campaign in Google. It really feels like it's just a DSA with a Smart Shopping combined together. I haven't yet seen any like true impact or true evidence that Performance Max has some algorithms that Smart Bidding doesn't have access to, or that it correlates this product, this URL in shopping with these search terms, so these need to work together in search. Like that thing that I think could be the coolest thing ever to happen to search. I don't think the correlation is there yet, at least from what we've seen. So we still feel like that the biggest learning we've had in Q4 is that Performance Max, whether or not you treat it as a shopping and DSA combined, or you treat it as just a shopping campaign, can perform really well, but treat it like you've always treated Smart Shopping and other things in terms of campaign overrides with seasonality bid adjustments and stuff like that.
Menachem, what have you seen?
Yeah, so we've seen similar to Andrew. It definitely can perform really well. It can scale really well. It's like Black Friday, looking at, stark increases day over day, week over week. It really can perform well, but we have very similar setups where most of the clients that are selling their own branded private label product, like direct to consumer, those are the ones where we'll also add creative assets. We'll take the top performing creative from the Facebook side and layer it on top. We do see that can work well, but I think it has to have a solid base of data behind it from the search and shopping component of it. So it really has to understand who the consumer is. But otherwise, like for the clients that we serve that are selling, products from hundreds of other brands, those we typically tend to lean more towards the Smart Shopping style, but also with a healthy mix of standard shopping. We ideally, especially for larger accounts, don't like to run pure Performance Max. We like to layer on search, shopping, and other campaign types as well.
Right. So I think obviously a bigger advertiser is going to use all the traditional campaign types, and then Performance Max may be one of the layers. So I don't think there's often a discussion of like, should we just do PMax? Even Google doesn't recommend just PMax, right? It says This is in addition to your search and display campaigns.
Yeah, I don't think they recommend that yet, but they likely will recommend that at some point.
So you think they will actually start recommending just do PMax?
I mean, so for smaller advertisers, we do that, like with limited budgets. Sometimes it can work better, but it's meant to be an all-in-one. If you can hit all the placements, it's just
right.
You lose a lot of insight, you lose a lot of control. You're sort of feeding it.
Yeah, and let's also qualify then for a minute what it means to perform better, right? So if you're not going to measure any level of detail, if you're not going to have time to do optimizations that are based off of those insights, then sure, fine, whatever. Put all my brand, my remarketing, all the cheap stuff, put it together with the expensive stuff, and you give me some sort of output at the end where nobody knows where it came from, but it looks cheap. Because Google may be
I think we have I had a great example. We took over an account last summer where they were running Performance Max. And August we went in and I think it's a D2C brand it's a D2C brand, really narrow space. There wasn't the account hadn't really gone anywhere. So it's just there was a couple of brand campaigns, 8 different agencies had tried 8 different things the last 10 years. Nothing had really worked. All of a sudden they launched Performance Max right before we started, and they're like, we really love it, but now we want to scale it. And the more I looked into it, all that happened in Performance Max was that it was branded search. That's all it was. There was $500 out of a $10,000 monthly spend that went to the shopping setup, right? So when we went in and I moved, I changed everything over standard shopping, did some the old-fashioned keyword split, because that's what we've seen work pretty well with getting something launched, and so we don't spread our data way too thin. And I had the director of growth go in and just reactivate the Performance Max campaigns after a couple of months, and specifically write the campaign name, "Do not change, Andrew." And I went no. Why did you do that? And he was like, no, they're performing super well. I spoke to the CEO and we all agreed that we should continue to run this. And I was like, okay, somebody missed what I told you guys 2 months ago. So I explained how it all worked again. And that's kind of like my pet peeve with this whole thing, is that it can look like it's performing really well. And sometimes it's just taking in the branded search. Sometimes it's taking in high performing search queries from your regular campaign. Sometimes it's taking in again, some things on the shopping side. I've rarely seen that it's a retargeting issue in this day and age. It's more like search intent that keeps me taken over. And that's really where I like to pull in the differentiator there, is saying, if you don't care, if you treat your account as a whole anyways, then Performance Max can do really well. Or the people who still today clinging on to control with audience targeting, demographic targeting, stateside targeting, not using any broad match, not using any phrase match, not using any dynamic search ads. Performance Max will increase your exposure, and it will perform better than what you have today, meaning it will produce more revenue at a better ROAS. But you could have gotten that with a proper setup anyways. However, if you don't know these things, and if you're not at a proper size where you can pay somebody to do it, Performance Max is actually the best thing that ever happened to Google. Please don't take that as a thing and put it on Twitter, because that's going to be an issue for me.
I mean, and how unfair is this, right? So if you're an agency and you do all this advanced structure, and then the client's calling you out and being like, well, how much of this is being driven by brand, and how much are you hijacking my SEO efforts by using remarketing? And then you put PMax in, and it's like, oh my God, technology, AI, it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. Google's doing amazing. And it's like, no, you should be asking it the same questions and putting it to the same standards, right? But Andrew, you sort of brought up a great point, and I'd love to hear from Menachem on this. If you make the argument should we just get the best results from the account? Why is that not a good thing? How do you argue to a client that there is something better than just this one campaign that gets pretty good results?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. From my perspective, it's it can get pretty good results, but it won't necessarily get pretty good results. And if you hire an agency that specializes in it, you'll likely get better results. I've seen many cases where Performance Max was just set up with a basic shopping feed or whatever, and they're missing the fundamentals like the audience signal to guide it to who it should show it to, the proper titles, descriptions, or taxonomy in the data feed. So the system doesn't really understand what you're selling. At the end of the day, it's just cycling through clicks and money and not driving revenue. So it could work, but it could also fail miserably. And so you kind of need something more.
And I mean, it's one of the angles here that if you have one Performance Max campaign and you set it to a target return on ad spend, that's kind of like average for your whole business. Like, is it okay to sell a bunch of socks at a loss and that's made up for by the TVs that you sell at a profit? Like, is that cool? Because yeah, sure, that's going to maximize your revenue. But for the people not watching but listening, like I see Andrew shaking his head. So Andrew, what do you think?
No, and it's like it's one of those things. Like it sounds fine in the. It sounds fine. It's not that big of a deal, but the problem with like, so you have a high margin product and a low margin product running on the same ROAS target. You're never competing on, like I just did an audit on this yesterday. You're not competing. Like your high margin product is not competing because the high margin product that you have might be, if that's not all you sell. So some of your competitors, that's all they sell, and they know what their margin is. So they'll set a lower ROAS target for the exact same product or the exact same category. So you're at a disadvantage right there, and you're overpaying for transactions or for revenue on the lower margin side. So just there, you have an issue with doing that. That can be easily fixed by just either running profit bidding or just splitting up your Performance Max campaigns. The bigger issue with lumping it all together is something we've seen with brand bidding and smart bidding. So if you have a branded term, you just put smart bidding on it and you put it at a 500% ROAS, it's not gonna stop bidding when if it's at 2000% ROAS. It's going to continue bidding higher and higher and higher and higher and higher. And we've just routinely taken, especially in-house accounts, and just gone like, hey, let's push your branded terms to manual bidding. And and then it just reduces the CPC greatly. And it's the same thing that happens inside of Performance Max. So when you have a bunch of like branded terms and stuff like that, they will overpay for your highest performing search terms. Sometimes it's not a big problem, but especially for high volume accounts, that can be an issue.
And so this is all an auction, right? Second price auction. So why would someone overpay on the brand if you keep raising the bid? Explain that a little bit.
Oh, so that's a very, very good question. It took me a long time to be able to explain in a simple manner. And part of it is your brand term in and of itself isn't bid that high. So let's say Optmyzr. Just Optmyzr is not that expensive to run on. But Optmyzr PPC tool, that you can potentially buy, I don't know what it is, but let's say you can buy it for $5 per click at the lowest, and you still get in top 4, a decent CTR, decent traffic. But let's say you have a super high ROAS on that, and Google will then say, hey, our smart bidding will say, that needs to be bid much higher. So we're trying to get it in, so Google or smart bidding will bid that into the top 1 position. So it will start competing against PPC optimization tool, which I guess will have $20, $30, $40, $50 CPCs. Mm-hmm. And that's where that will then pull your overall brand spend exceedingly high. Like your brand combined with Trustpilot has $100 CPCs. It's ridiculous if you set it that high, and that's where it will pull out a lot of money.
Exactly. And then I guess that gets us back into the whole discussion of having a little bit more control, being able to maybe set some targets based on return on ad spend, based on internal business goals that we have. Whereas if you just say like, here's the brand and bid it to any degree that you want, it just captures everything.
We take a very similar approach for branded campaigns because like it has a different business goal. For branded keywords, your goal is to make sure they don't land on a competitor website and you lose the sale. And so if your ad shows up 100% of the time, that's your business goal. So we like either manual CPC or target impression share for that. But to Andrew's point is like once you reach 90%, 100% of your pure brand keyword, if you're on target ROAS or smart bidding, the system will keep trying to get more and it will start to veer away from your actual brand towards those other keywords, and it has a different business goal.
And then in performance, yeah, Andrew, go ahead.
Even if it doesn't do, like, just to expand on that, and that's where, again, it's not a performance max issue. This is just as much a brand versus non-brand issue. Like, again, if you're a branded term that it lets run at a 2000% ROAS and it lets generic run at 100% ROAS, and it kind of balances it out. For the naked eye, that means you're hitting $200,000 revenue a month at your target ROAS, but you're not being profitable on the generic ad spend that you're having.
Right.
All of your brand, which you have built up there, I as a marketer, let me rephrase that. Me as a PPC marketer can take zero credit for your branded terms. There's nothing like. And I know some of the people on my team argue against that, but as a whole, there are some gray areas, but as a whole, I can't take any credit whatsoever. So if I pay 200, like if I have a 200% ROAS on a generic term and it's unprofitable, but I have a 2000% ROAS on my branded term, that doesn't even out. Again, there's some gray area and some attribution and stuff like that, but as a whole, that doesn't even out. So I don't want Google, I don't want smart bidding, and I'm trying to be very hard to not say Google, because I think that's a whole. Smart bidding does this, where it tries to even it out, and it shouldn't. It's two different entities.
All right, so yeah, Andrew, that's super interesting. Let's talk a little bit about attribution, which is one thing you talked about, right? So how do you figure out that your brand keyword is going across all these other searches? And then there's also the big conversation about negative keywords in Performance Max, which you can ask your rep to put in. But Menachem, any thoughts on attribution and negative keywords?
Yeah, I mean, as far as attribution, I mean, we typically optimize campaigns based on the in-platform, the Google Ads attribution. We like data-driven because it attributes revenue across multiple touch points from Google Ads. Within Performance Max campaigns, blocking brand search, again, it's something that varies. Like the typical answer, it depends. For really small accounts, I don't like to bother with it because it's another signal the system kind of needs. But as you get bigger and you're spending more, especially when there is a lot more brand search volume, you really want to make sure that they get segmented, because otherwise, like Andrew mentioned, you're paying a much higher cost per click than you need to capture the brand search, and you'd rather focus that budget on new customer acquisition at a more profitable level.
So negative brand keywords, yes or no?
Depends.
Depends. Okay, Andrew?
Yes.
Yes.
I agree, it depends, but if anybody needs a clear answer, then
yes.
just yes, but there are
negative...
definitely cases where it doesn't matter.
And the one thing I would just tell you is that by blocking negative brand keywords from Performance Max, aside from launching a search campaign, you also need to launch a shopping campaign so that your ads show up on the shopping listings as well. Because otherwise, if you just exclude from Performance Max and launch search, you'll be missing out the shopping placement for branded keywords.
Right. Negative generic keywords in PMax, yes or no? And I know it depends, but
I don't like to do much unless we see something clearly is off base. But I don't really like to.
So I've heard some people say that putting negatives, like let's talk about negative keywords. Negative keywords are much more specific than positive keywords, right? So they tend to, like if you put negative flowers, that means that if the word flowers appears in the search, that's when it becomes excluded. If somebody puts roses in the search, that is a broad match to flowers, but as a negative, it's not negative broad match, it's negative exact by and large, right? They might be plural singulars, but it's got to be pretty close. So like, does that seem to work differently in PMax? Like, are we limiting the system too much from exploring and finding things by putting in generic negative keywords?
Like I think if you're going to the PMax route, then like I have this whole thing, like I love different people doing different things in PPC, and with PMax, if you do A, you have to do B, and you have to do C. If you do PMax, you have to do smart bidding. You have to stop doing negative keywords. Like it's like you've chosen a route, commit, because you don't get the search term data. I even feel like overall negative keywords is not that valuable anymore, but again, it depends. But if you do Performance Max, don't do negative keywords. It's like there's no need to. You can't see the data per se anyway, so you end up guessing. And if you're guessing for negative keywords, that can hurt a lot more than you think, because you don't see if you have accidentally added, let's say, flowers for a flower delivery company, and you forgot to put it as an exact match negative because that's what you're used to doing. And so like, you're going to hurt a lot more than you think, in my opinion.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that also, because with Performance Max, it should on its own, with smart bidding, if it doesn't hit your goals, it should automatically stop serving for whatever traffic it is. So if it sends traffic for flowers and it doesn't convert, it should just stop on its own.
Right. And the big question is always like, how long until it learns and it decides that it's statistically significant before it stops spending another $1,000 towards that keyword. Right. And then ultimately,
like if you look at it.
Well, I was going to say, this is the frustration that people have, right? Is like, yes, at the end of the day, this campaign type gives you good enough performance, but like, how often does it go down a rabbit hole of trying something that you could have said, like, yeah, we didn't need to spend that $1,000 to learn that. I already could have told you that.
Right. So I think that's the tricky part with scaling Performance Max. As you increase the budgets, it looks for new keywords, new audiences, new places to show your ads, and then it kind of goes through that learning phase. Typically, when they're in a stable place, spending similar amounts on a daily basis, I find that it doesn't do as much of that once it finds its groove.
And did you find that to be a problem in Q4 when like the budgets typically get raised?
Not as much, because conversion rates are increased then, search volume is increased then, so like you have the room to spend more.
So you're basically increasing the budget to capture more of the same that's now available, but you don't have to go fishing for new stuff.
Exactly.
That makes sense. Hey, let's shift the conversation here to a little bit more lead gen. I guess we've talked a lot about e-commerce. Now, one thing that I always find curious is like, if you're in lead gen, people think, oh, I shouldn't do target return on ad spend. I shouldn't be value-based bidding. Do you have a take on that? And like, is lead gen actually kind of more similar to e-commerce than people think?
I think it is, because ultimately the closer the system gets to your business profitability, the better job it can do. Like, for example, if you go use target customer acquisition, target CPA, you're telling the system you'll pay X amount of dollars for every lead, but the system doesn't know the difference between crappy leads, good leads, sales qualified, just spam form fills, whatever it is. And so if you can use value-based bidding with target ROAS, it'll definitely work better. And there's a lot of ways to get there, but basically you want to feed the system on what does a good lead look like, somebody you can actually sell your product or service to. If you can give it that data, target ROAS can work really well.
I totally agree. So what do you do?
Sure. So, I mean, at a very basic level, if you don't have your sales data coming into Google Ads, you can basically score the different lead types. Maybe phone calls are worth more than form submissions or chats. But in an ideal world, you want to connect your CRM. If you use Salesforce or HubSpot, there's built-in integrations where you can, as a lead progresses through your sales pipeline, you can give it different values or different conversion actions in Google Ads and bid towards that. If you don't have Salesforce or HubSpot, you can use a tool like Zapier to connect, and basically, as let's say you collect a lead, you spoke to them on the phone, so now it's like a sales qualified lead. You can mark that as a milestone, as a conversion in Google Ads. And then as the lead progresses, you can assign different values or real sales value. Once you close the deal, you can pipe that data back into Google Ads and tell it, this lead turned into $1,000 in revenue. And then it'll use that for target ROAS-based bidding.
Right. Important question. Is it Zapier or Zapier?
I always say Zapier, but honestly, who knows?
I don't know. I'm listening to this other great podcast, and it's about company names that people mispronounce, and I actually also don't know what the right one is. So if anyone knows, I'd love to hear. No, but so that makes total sense, right? So you're saying basically too many companies, they look at the conversion event as the form being filled out on the page. That's the lead, and then it sort of stops at that point. Now, you did talk about, as you start capturing this into your CRM, you have two options. You can either create new conversion actions as the lead progresses down the funnel, or you can restate the existing lead and update its value, or you can even retract conversion
Correct.
using OCI and OCT. Like, do you have a preference between creating more conversion actions or restating an existing one?
So I like to create additional actions. So this way you can actually visualize it in Google Ads. You can put in different columns or segment your conversion so you can see how many leads progress through the funnel through the different steps and assign the values there. And definitely a good idea to negate the poor leads so the system doesn't keep going after those type.
Okay, when you say negate, you mean like retract, sort of like say that it's no longer. Yeah. Okay. What sort of timeframes do you typically use? So I've heard from Google that really the changes made in 2 to 3 days of the original conversion, that is what the machine learning prefers, pays most attention to. Now that's kind of counter to what Google then says, which is you have 90 days to import an OCI, and you have 55 days to restate something on a transaction ID. So is it completely meaningless to do things at day 85?
I don't think it's completely meaningless. We still do it. We like to send as much data as possible. Obviously, the more transaction volume you're dealing with, the better it'll do. If you only have a few leads, it's much harder for the system. But once you have a lot of data, it's much easier. But we just try to send as much data as possible.
And Andrew, what does that look like on your side? I know maybe a little bit more e-commerce, but like lifetime value, and is that something you play with, or like returns, refunds, accounting for shipping cost? Like, because ultimately what we're talking about here is communicating a correct and realistic value to Google, conversion value. What does that look like in your business?
So it varies from industry to industry. Apparel, you have to somehow measure in returns. Some countries, especially if like certain countries in Europe, like Germany, can have up to 60% returns. So you need it built into the system somehow. Other than that, like our go-to is the profit-based bidding. Simply just getting the profit from each transaction, so you get it right then and there. So most of the systems that work with that can also do some kind of returns or canceled orders. Overall, we see it's less of an issue with e-commerce though. If you get the profit part included, that's really the biggest thing for anyone who sells products that have various margins. If you don't have varying margins, it doesn't matter that much. And I'm good friends with Frederick, who runs one of these companies, and he hates when I say it, but that's like, if you have different margins, different margins is the best thing in the world. You can't live without it. We've tried turning it off, turning it on accounts. It's the best thing in the world. But if you're selling a mattress, you have 60% margin on that mattress, getting the profit in doesn't really matter that much.
And then in your sort of line of business, so you're saying reporting the profit of the sale, that's an instantaneous process. What about returns? Would you, after 30 days, like retract a conversion if it was fully returned, or still restate the value? Or is there sort of a cutoff point at which you find the machine just doesn't care what happens after day X?
Well, we have a tough time actually like completely actualizing what the impact is, but like I'll mimic a little bit what you've been told. Like it is supposed to know that if you constantly negate 20% of the conversions after 30 days, it should take that into account moving forward until it gets other data. So if there is a lack of negated conversions in the last 30 days, but the 30 days prior to that, there were 20% negated, it will still work based off saying, hey, it's expecting the negated conversions to come.
Right. So you're saying that it's actually starting to build prediction models from sort of your late feedback. So it now says, oh, on day one of this conversion happening, I have to expect it's going to be a 20% decrease in value, because usually Andrew reports that's 20% decline after 30 days. Menachem, I'm really curious from you, right? I think in lead gen, one of the biggest problems is like, how do you figure out quickly what is the value of a lead? I mean, if this is a 6-month sales cycle, we're now way past what you can tell Google. So, but you still want to communicate something. Like, have you found a good way to predict this, or do you just use like actual values?
So I think that's where like the different funnel steps come into play. Like we do work across a lot of different industries, but I think legal is the biggest one where you might not see a settlement or revenue from it for like 12 to 18 months. And so what we measure is just the progression of, from that initial contact form submission or phone call, does it turn into the next step in the funnel and the next step in the funnel? Obviously with lead gen campaigns that turn over much faster, a shorter sales cycle, it's less of a problem. But if we can score it, like, give a score of 10, 20, 30, 40 to each step in the funnel, even if it's still far away from, the end sale, that helps a lot.
Mm-hmm. All right. So the next topic that I'd love to talk about is audiences. So Performance Max campaigns, obviously you can attach audiences to it, one of them being your existing customers so that you can have a focus on new customer acquisition. But what is your strategy and what have you seen working with audiences? Menachem, let's start with you.
Sure. So typically I don't like to run any Performance Max without an audience signal. Again, it's not true targeting. It's really just telling the system, like, this is who I believe my customer is. So we like to start with, attaching your existing customer list also so you can do new customer acquisition, but additionally so that it can target similar people. And then we try to find like the top converting search terms, build an audience around that, certain interests, demographics, layer on whatever you can, and whatever other first party data you have, email lists, lead lists, things of that nature can really help a lot too.
And then, so when you say it helps a lot, what?
It kind of kickstarts it faster or pushes it in a different direction. Like for brand new Performance Max, we've seen that it could take like 4 to 6 weeks to really hit its stride. So putting strong audience signals help it get in front of the right consumer faster, especially with lead gen, but also with e-commerce. And like also if you find that you're not getting the performance you need, switching out the audience signals, it's just a signal, but it pushes the system in a different direction, can help you reach the right consumers faster.
Have you found any, and Andrew, this for you, but Google is so big on like, oh my God, this new campaign type has all these amazing insights that you don't get in traditional campaigns. Like, have any of these insights amongst them audiences helped you actually discover something that you were able to do something with?
It's definitely interesting data. I think it's similar to what we see like in Google Analytics. Like they show a lot of underlying audience data similar to that. Does help push you in another direction. You go like, oh, I didn't realize these kind of people would be interested in our product or our service. So definitely is helpful for sure.
No, like I'm more pessimistic on audiences and it's more because like this, like I just feel like there's, maybe it's because of the types of accounts we work with, that like for the general search and shopping perspective, people are searching for the product, whether like they just are, and like whether they're in a luxury segment or a newspaper read segment. So I guess if you have already existing accounts where all this learning has already taken place, that's where I feel like the value of audiences for the regular overall search and shopping efforts are not as impactful as I would want them to be. I still feel like that audience overlap when you go in and you look at the audience manager and you can see what audiences your conversions actually, like your converted users, what audiences they appear in, and sometimes you're like, wow, that would be amazing, I'll take this like as like a 12x index on newspaper readers. So you put in newspaper readers in your regular campaigns, you go like, yeah, nothing happened. And I always get disappointed. And I think like I spoke to what is little A big A, I always forget his name, Aaron
Levy
from Tenuity. Yeah, I spoke to him at Berlin about this as well, and he was like, yeah. He also went back and forth on it, but underlined like where they had seen a ton of success, and then we see kind of the same thing is like the broader searches, the more generic searches, right, the ones you couldn't touch before, layering them with audiences. That's where it starts becoming powerful, and that's where I can also see, okay, maybe PMax can actually utilize that to like branch out to like searches that it wouldn't normally be able to perform on, to actually generate a return on by doing that, because that's what we see in the regular search and shopping campaigns we're able to do. But as a whole, I'm I always get disappointed with audiences. Like I
But
feel like I feel Google could do so much more.
Yeah, but I think that's a good point, because the more you are in the core search and shopping, the less the audience really matters, because you have the keyword intent. But as you move towards broader keywords, but I think where Performance Max finds audience useful is when you take your top performing creative from like Facebook and Instagram ads and run that in Performance Max. So it's less around keywords, more around display. That's where the audience signals can really help a lot more to help it find the right consumer.
All right. So
Mix.
some people like it, some people don't. As with everything, it
People want it to be more.
It depends. Good. Final topic is asset groups. How do you like to run asset groups in your Performance Max campaigns? Do you use a lot of them? Very few? Menachem, I heard you say that sometimes you get these insights about maybe a new audience that you didn't expect that's actually really interested in your product. Does that lead to more asset groups with different creatives? What's the strategy around all of that?
Yeah, I mean, we typically tend to build campaigns and asset groups, or even in standard search and shopping ad groups, around product categories or product, specific product services or categories. It's very similar in Performance Max to that end. I think the only time we would really segment the same product or service into multiple asset groups with different audience signals if we believe that there needs to be very different messaging around it. But otherwise, it's typically around the product or service.
Okay, around products or service, makes sense. And then obviously you put in the different creatives based on what that product or service is.
Correct.
Yeah. Andrew.
Same. Like it's a category, brand, or some kind of creative push. Like, and then I always say this: don't overcomplicate it if you're not going to create different creative. So don't create an asset group for Nike and another one for Adidas and another one for Reebok if you're gonna save 70% anyways in all three. Like and we see it all the time. Like people just overcomplicating setups. And then not actually using that complication to or more granular structure for anything really. So do it as complicated as you need to serve your creative purposes, and targets and stuff like that.
I agree with that 100%.
Yeah, structure has to be driven by business needs, not just like because you think you can beat the machine at doing something by just.
Yeah.
There was also an interesting thread on Twitter recently about the conversion data that's used by machine learning is all triggered off of, or the predictive mechanisms look at the conversion action, and the conversion action tends to live either at the MCC, the account, or the campaign level. And it's all the data from that goes into the conversion. So it doesn't really matter how many asset groups or ad groups you have. Right. All of it feeds to like, does this thing convert or not? And then it's like, does that conversion correlate to a certain query? Does it correlate to a specific audience? And that's where it starts to feed and learn. But you can't beat the machine by adding more levels of granularity. But I see Andrew wagging his finger, so.
Yeah, because that's one thing that we've like really changed our mind on, or I've changed my mind on the last 6 months, because like responsive search ads has been killing us a little bit, because the way that the more I look into it, the more it appears that the more data you push into a responsive search ad, the more it will use conversions instead of just CTR and impressions to define what is a good converting asset. And that has really made us just go like, yeah, so our goal for the future is not to structure campaigns based on how we like to structure them. It's about how much traffic can we push into a single responsive search ad while still having the ad still make sense.
Right.
So you're saying
that's something we're testing at the moment, and that's like we're seeing some initial good results, but it's going to be really interesting to see if that actually.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying flatten your structure and reduce your complexity to get as much impressions through a single RSA, which then consolidates conversions. If you were to use the same RSA across multiple ad groups, are you testing whether that builds up enough volume for it to learn?
We've tried that in the past, and we just don't see a direct correlation between the different RSAs. Sometimes there's a correlation, but it's more been like an accident that the same assets actually perform the best in the different ones than anything really. And it's like one of our biggest things is because like if I put in a safe 70% in any asset in any responsive search ad, that's going to get the number one impressions, and that's not the one that converts the best. I know, like from all the last 10 years on expanded text ads, we know that's not the case in all cases, but it will always have the high CTR. So the more it pushes like a message that has a high CTR, and I know you and I differ on that, Fred, about whether or not an ad should actually cause a conversion or it should cause a click. I'm in the heavy camp that it should cause a conversion. So the more we drive into a single responsive search ad, then we feel it will focus more on conversions.
Yeah, and I don't know where you think I fall on this, but like obviously I think the ad should cause the click with a probability of converting down the line, but that's the landing page's job, right?
Yeah, your support in your support staff in Optmyzr says the same thing.
Well, I've trained them well. Menachem, you have some ideas on this?
I'm a big proponent for simplicity over complexity. We try to use as few campaigns as possible while still supporting the overall business structure. Like there's got to be a good case for it, separate budget, separate goals, separate whatever, but not just to overcomplicate it. I feel like people do that. They create complexity for no reason, and it's much harder for the algorithm or the smart bidding to have enough data within each subset.
But it was so pretty when we used to do it. It was so pretty. We could have Nike shirts. We could have Nike short sleeve shirts. We have Nike long sleeve shirts, and all the URLs fixed to the right places. And we showed the keyword in the ad, and it was so pretty. And yesterday, 2 days ago, I was doing a coaching call, and I looked at the account. I was like, yeah, we're just gonna go like this, and we just shrank 85 different ad groups into 10, and just like. We need more data in individual ad groups. So
I've learned not to fight the system. I've learned not to fight progress. You take the tools we have today and just make it work the best we can.
Exactly. And then hopefully it still comes down to like, listen, if you have a business reason, like different product margins, or you have to allocate different budgets to different things throughout different seasons, like that's why you add complexity and structure to have access to that. But I am scared of a world where everything becomes super flat. And again, but that's what we're hearing. Like Performance Max, you could technically run one campaign. It would seem like it's producing good results. But when you start asking questions like, is it really doing that? And that's the big question. And, thank you both for kind of like weighing in on this. And I think we're going to have to do another episode as we all continue to learn what really happens. So I'd love to have final thoughts from each of you, or just where people can find you. Menachem, I know you write for Search Engine Land. Great posts on there on Performance Max. Andrew, I love your periodic emails I get in my inbox and the blog posts you do as well. So tell people where to find you and how to follow up. Andrew, let's go with you first.
So I think the biggest thing is so I'm big on Twitter. I'll be a lot more Andrew on Twitter, and I'll be corporate Andrew on LinkedIn. On both places. One is a lot cleaner than the other. The more clients we get from Twitter, the more clean my Twitter will be. But I hope we won't get that many clients from Twitter, so I can continue being myself there. A lot more sassy than anything really. So a lot more honest takes on Twitter than on LinkedIn. But other than that, I just wanted like one final note on the whole Performance Max thing is like I really think it's just important that people treat Performance Max from like really what you said, Fred. Like it's about figuring out what's your business strategy and what do you have available in front of you. If you don't have the competencies or time or resources, or if you've been burned by one agency after the other, Performance Max can be a great option. But if you have some competence, if you have the resources to actually build out more in terms of account structure and stuff like that, you can get more out of an account. You can get more out of search by building out a setup, but it should fit into your business strategy. It's not a one size fit all. It shouldn't always be tested, but it works really well sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't. It really depends what do you have internally to build it out. And I always recommend early advertisers just run Performance Max. Like Just get some data in. That's better than anything you can really ever do. Then you can figure it out down the line.
Okay, but get some smart people, and SavvyRevenue has a few of those, so that's always an option. All right, Menachem, what about you?
Sure. I think my closing thoughts would be that, mirroring what Andrew's saying is Performance Max is a great place to start. It is a lot more complicated than it would seem if you don't have the right data input. So you just want to make sure you're able to set it up right and give it the right data feed, give it the right parameters to get you the success, and it should be able to do it for you. But yeah, take the time to set it up right, and it should do well.
And how do people get a hold of you?
Sure. You can find me in the same places. I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn, Menachem Ani. Always trying to share knowledge and everything we're doing. There's a lot to learn. I feel like every day there's something new with Performance Max. So just try to share what we're learning along the way.
And if people want a quote for getting some help, where do they go?
Sure. You just visit our website, jxtgroup.com. We're always happy to help.
All right. Well, thank you both. Thank you, everyone, for watching. If you've enjoyed the episode, we're going to have many more to come, so subscribe on our channel. And if you need some help with managing PPC, we have a great tool called Optmyzr. We got a 2-week free trial, so go ahead and sign up for that, see what we can do, talk to our amazing support staff like Andrew. I don't know if they're amazing, if you agree with the advice they give.
Oh, they're super good. I'm happy every time.
Okay. No, we get really great marks, and we have a bunch of smart people there as well. So check it out. But thanks all for watching. Thanks for joining us to the panelists, and we'll see you for the next PPC Town Hall.